This is Springfield at 10:08 on a quiet Thursday morning in August, 4 minutes after it happened.
Overturned truck blocking Highway 26 near Campbell. Cars 2 and 3 report immediately to Highway 26.
The accident made quite a mess, but it could have been a lot worse. There was no fire at least, and no other vehicles were involved. The truck driver was injured, but not seriously. Within a few hours, it seemed, traffic would be moving normally again. It wasn't until Ed Perkins passed out that anyone realized Springfield might have something serious on its hands. 11:47 a.m., 300 miles away. General Samuels, area commander, receives an urgent request for Army assistance in a chemical emergency involving a commercial carrier under government contract. This set in motion the complex and coordinated procedure known as a chemical accident response. The transport of hazardous chemical agents by truck and rail is a commonplace occurrence in our industrial society. Whenever potentially dangerous military chemical agents or munitions are shipped, not only are all civil safety regulations observed, but the shipments are accompanied by specially trained technical escort teams. Each team member is an expert on the agent being transported, on detection and sealing of leaks, decontamination, first aid, firefighting, and other emergency procedures. Technical escort teams accompany hazardous cargo by all modes of transportation to ensure the highest degree of safety and security possible. They assume responsibility for the cargo on a 24-hour-a-day basis, from the point of departure until the cargo is delivered to the receiver. However, enormous quantities of hazardous commercial chemicals are transported throughout the nation every day without technical escort of any kind. Acids, corrosives, insecticides, explosive petroleum products, more than 200,000 bulk shipments a day. 1 out of every 10 trucks on the road carries a potentially dangerous substance, and in an average year, these trucks have a total of over 3,000 accidents. Even freight trains average more than 1 accident a week. In a recent 5-year period, 41 communities have had to be evacuated because of rail cargo accidents. By definition, accidents are not predictable. They can happen anywhere, anytime. It's extremely important that they be handled swiftly and knowledgeably so that civilian and military casualties are kept to a minimum. Though off-post accidents are not normally within Army jurisdiction, local authorities unable to deal with such emergencies frequently request Army resources and expertise to avert possible catastrophe.
Drake? Samuels here. There's been an accident near Springfield.
Once Army involvement has been authorized, the area commander's first action is to designate a general officer as the on-scene commander.
I want you to take personal charge.
What kind of chemical is involved? We'll put the CAECO emergency plan into operation.
General Drake, whose post is less than 10 miles from the accident site, has been chosen.
Good morning, Colonel. Good morning, General.
Colonel Franklin, who has the necessary background in chemical material handling, will function as the Chemical Accident Incident Control Officer, or CAECO.
Army assistance has been requested. The Department of the Army has granted approval to respond to this emergency.
As direct representative of the commander, the CAECO must be qualified by experience or special training in chemical accident control. Aided by an assistant and necessary operations personnel, the CAECO's immediate task will be to assemble a staff of emergency teams needed at the accident site. The first team to be summoned is normally the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Detachment. EOD detachments are located throughout the continental United States. Control detachments provide administrative supervision over the various field detachments. When a report of a chemical accident is received, it is immediately assigned for action to the field unit nearest the site. Highly trained in dealing with emergency situations, the EOD team is ready to move out on short notice. Usually the first trained personnel on the scene, they are responsible for evaluating the accident and advising the CACO on the extent of the hazards. Meanwhile, the CACO and his staff establish an emergency operations center on post and proceed to contact the remaining emergency teams that will be needed. These include CBR, a versatile, specially equipped team capable of detecting and identifying chemical agents, determining the extent of the hazards, and marking contaminated areas. Decontamination of limited areas can also be handled by this team. But in a case where a large area is involved, a decontamination team is advisable. Its responsibility is to provide decontamination of personnel, equipment, structures, and land surfaces which have been exposed to the agent. All team members have training similar to the CBR team, but with emphasis on decontamination. Their equipment may include portable and power-driven decontaminating apparatuses, water trailers and buckets, but will always provide a large area capability. The CACO will normally have an engineer team at his disposal as well. Equipped with water carriers, road scrapers, and other heavy equipment, this team is typically used to remove contaminated earth or dig drainage ditches where needed. The team leader works closely with the CACO to advise on equipment requirements and availability. A medical team consisting of doctors and corpsmen is among the first supporting teams to be contacted by the CACO. Capable of moving with equipment on short notice, its prime function is to advise on health hazards and render emergency medical treatment at the scene of the accident. Where requested in off-post incidents, the Provost Marshal will establish liaison with civil law enforcement officials to assist with security, traffic control, and evacuation. Depending on the needs and capabilities of local authorities, the military police can be of great value in an emergency situation. Proper communications at the accident site are all important. With responsibility for recommending and establishing communication facilities, the signal officer and communications team play a crucial role in any off-post chemical accident. An information officer is needed on the CACO staff to manage news operations. His primary task is to control the flow of information in order to prevent confusion and panic. In the case of off-post incidents, the advice of a military lawyer is essential. This representative of the Staff Judge Advocate's Office advises the CACO on proper procedures where contact with civilians or private property may be concerned. To avoid confusion at the accident site, all the emergency teams are ordered to report to a designated assembly area first, and not directly to the accident site. Meanwhile, at the assembly area, all the emergency teams notified by the CACO have now arrived. A well-chosen assembly area should be large enough to handle all team vehicles without congesting traffic in the vicinity. It should also have enough room for a helipad. The assembly area can be used for last-minute equipment and vehicle checks, to verify that everyone is present, and most important, as a final briefing point. Here, the CACO details what kind of an accident has occurred, the suspected agent involved, and the route that will be taken to the location. At this time, he also presents his plan for the organization of the command post, the positions each emergency team will occupy at the site. This will ensure as little confusion and delay as possible on arrival. Normally, the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Detachment is the first of the military emergency teams to arrive at the accident site. Although chemical company officials are still on their way, they have informed the police that the drums contain a potentially explosive industrial agent, the fumes of which are highly toxic. A check of chemical characteristics with Chemtrek, chemical company officials, and reference manuals indicates that the agent is also volatile enough to create a serious downwind vapor hazard. Until the extent of the hazard is known, the team leader immediately requests police to set up a 450-meter radius of exclusion around the site and a 2-kilometer exclusion area downwind of it. At the edge of the exclusion area, the team also sets up a hotline to demarcate the limits of the safe area. Anyone crossing the hotline will be subject to decontamination procedures. In handling chemical accidents, the EOD team organizes itself into several parties. The initial entry party, which usually includes the team leader, has the task of reaching the accident site and determining the extent of the hazard. This will include identification of the agent, determination of the number of damaged containers, and the extent of spillage. They make the initial evaluation of what should be accomplished in what priority, and are responsible for advising the CAECO. The undressing assistants began setting up the personnel decontamination station through which all personnel must process upon entry into and return from the contaminated area. The personnel decontamination station consists of a series of containers, brushes, decontaminants, and water, and is used by all personnel as a control point through which to both enter and leave the toxic area. At the personnel decontamination station, the undressing assistants make a final check of protective clothing and equipment prior to the departure of the initial entry party. Near the accident site, this party establishes an on-site shuffle pit consisting of a mixture of earth and supertropical bleach. This mixture will reduce the spread of contamination with the feet. As part of its reconnaissance, the initial entry party surveys the area and determines the number of leaking containers and the extent of damage. Radio provides communication for the initial entry party back to the command post. The command post operator remains on hand to receive information and make any necessary contact with higher headquarters as required. Due to the extent of the contamination, the EOD team leader has prescribed that the work party wear full protective clothing. Back at the assembly area, the CAECO is making a final check of men and equipment. When he is satisfied the staff understands the plan, he gives the order to move to the site. Usually, he leads the way himself. At the site, the initial entry party has completed its evaluation. The team leader calls back to the command post to summon the work party, detailing the equipment they will need to begin cleanup operations. Now fully dressed in protective clothing, the work party moves out to the accident site with its tools and equipment. Based on his estimate of total spillage, the team leader also gives the command post operator enough data to calculate the downwind hazard area. This can be determined with good accuracy with the M2 calculator, which takes into account gas concentrations, negligible risk dosage, temperature gradient, and wind speed variables. The various other emergency teams are now beginning to arrive at the accident site. The civilian police chief starts coordination of his activities with those of the provost marshal. Once all teams have arrived at the command post site, they begin unloading and setting up equipment within their designated areas. The signal officer and his staff immediately began setting up phone lines. At a site like this, initial communications may be by commercial telephone, with lines held open for extended periods. In more remote areas, communications possibilities may include aircraft or vehicular radios, Mars or mobile radio teletype teams. Having conducted an aerial reconnaissance of the accident site, the CACO and his assistant arrive on the scene to take charge of operations there. While he consults with representatives from the chemical company, his emergency teams continue to set up according to plan in the designated command post area. The Provost Marshal initiates coordination with the local police. Depending on the situation, additional emergency teams may be required to handle such things as air transport, illumination for night operations, and food supply. As soon as he processes through the personnel decontamination station, the EOD team leader briefs the CACO on the situation. This includes an estimate of the degree of hazard, what the downwind exclusion area has been calculated to be, and any other recommendations which may be appropriate. Leak sealing of the ruptured drums, which still contain some of the chemical material, is accomplished by the EOD work party with plaster of Paris bandages. After the drums have been sealed, they will be transported to a safe holding area. The exclusion area calculations are used by the staff to make a map showing the geographical area that may be affected and whether evacuation will be necessary. With assurances that the explosive hazards have now been eliminated, the CACO orders the CBR team into action. One part of the team conducts a survey to determine the extent of the surface contamination. They are equipped with chemical agent detector kits. Another part of the team is cordoning off the contaminated area and marking its limits with chemical agent hazard markers. Military police also help to patrol the area and turn back traffic. Another task is the temporary evacuation of several homes that lie in the calculated downwind hazard area. Newsmen have begun to appear on the scene demanding information. The CACO, however, refers them to the information officer, explaining that he is the only person authorized to brief media representatives. A designated information post is important to reduce the confusion and distraction caused when newsmen wander through, questioning emergency teams indiscriminately. The idea is not to withhold information, but to channel it through one clear source. In the event of a serious emergency, newsmen can provide valuable assistance by informing the public of safety measures and cutting off dangerous rumors. Coordination with local medical facilities is important, and they should always be provided with advance information on the kind and number of casualties which might be expected and the agent involved. In off-post emergencies of this kind, the legal officer usually remains on the scene. His advice is essential in matters relating to military authority and possible claims against the government. After concluding their survey, the CBR team reports to the CACO that all areas of contamination have been located and marked. The Provost Marshal confirms that all hazardous areas are fully evacuated and closed to access. The situation is under control. The only major task still remaining is decontamination. As directed by the CACO, the CBR and decontamination team leaders now work out an efficient plan for eliminating the remaining hazards. The plan details the equipment needed, types of decontaminants to be used, and methods of employment. On approval by the CACO, the plan is converted into action. First, the larger puddles of chemical agent are absorbed with vermiculite. This is then shoveled into drums, which will be sealed and removed. Other members of the team use M11 portable decontaminating apparatuses to spray the wrecked vehicle with a neutralizing solution. Behind them, a truck-mounted, power-driven M12A1 decontaminating apparatus sprays the highway with another decontaminant. The CAECO also directs the engineer team to remove the contaminated earth along the highway shoulder where considerable runoff has taken place. In addition, local authorities are alerted to monitor water supply and drainage patterns in the vicinity for the next few weeks for evidence of residue. After a waiting period to allow for complete neutralization, the CBR team conducts a thorough survey, confirming that surface contamination has been entirely removed. With that, the CAECO informs the local authorities that the area is clean and can now be returned to normal use. The chemical accident is over. On the CAECO's order, the emergency teams prepare to pull out. In his last official act in the capacity of CAECO, Colonel Franklin informs the Emergency Operations Center that his task has been successfully completed. Unfortunately, chemical accidents will continue to happen. Each will produce a unique situation, calling for a specially tailored response. In some cases, more emergency teams may be needed. In others, fewer will be required. More important is that there will be an overall plan in readiness, a well-planned command response to eliminate the hazards and minimize the effects, whether it be in a military or civilian context. We've seen how a capable chemical accident incident control officer, coordinating the many emergency teams at his disposal, efficiently handled a situation that could have been much more disastrous for Springfield. Because of this successful cooperative effort, few would guess what had happened here only a few hours before. Even the people of Springfield will probably forget all about it in a few days. And that's the happiest ending a chemical accident can have.